Good Wednesday morning, everybody. This is First Warn Storm Team Chief Meteorologist Brad Panavich. Want to do a quick update on Sandy, which could end up being kind of a historic storm for the East Coast, even though it may never directly make landfall. This is the latest visible satellite image of Sandy gaining strength south of Jamaica. You can see we've got some overshooting cloud tops right near the center, likely gaining some pretty good wind here in the last, I'd say, couple of hours. If it's not a hurricane here shortly, it likely will be before it makes landfall, moving to the north over Jamaica and then moving towards the southeast part of Cuba. You can see it's a very large circulation, and this is part of the situation that's going to unfold for the East Coast. If you spread this out a little bit, you can see how big the circulation is. We've got bands all the way down here into Central America and even some outflow all the way up here north of the Bahamas. That's a huge area of circulation that is developing so far with Sandy. So when you look at the distance this storm has from basically here all the way down to here, that's roughly about 1,300 miles wide, at least north to south, and maybe just about half that distance wide. So a very impressive system developing. Now the Hurricane Center forecast track has it moving almost due north. It's going to make a very near pass to the southeast coast of Florida, and then it gets off the Carolina coast. This is where things are going to get interesting. When you look at some of the parameters of the winds, the wind field, these are the wind fields. Notice it's a very tight wind field initially, and as it gets farther north, the wind field spreads out dramatically. And that therein lies kind of the issue. Once it gets up towards the Carolinas, it's going to have a huge long duration impact. And what we're looking at to the north and west over North America is this big 500 millibar trough. This is a mega trough. For this time of year, this is more typical of a winter. This has got a very cold air mass behind it. It's a very deep trough. We've got blocking over the North Atlantic, which is going to basically trap this system along the East Coast. And it's going to transition from a tropical system to an extratropical system, basically a huge nor'easter. It could be some kind of hybrid monster that's going to sit there for days. In fact, when we look at the Hurricane Center forecast track, you can see all of the forecast models are very tightly clustered. So that's why their track is so tight all the way up to the Bahamas. But once you get north of there, there's a huge spread in the model guidance. In fact, there's a small number of the models, and especially some of the ensemble models, are starting to rotate the system back to the north and west into areas of the mid-Atlantic or the northeast. Now, it's hard to say if that's the tropical part of the system or it's just a low-pressure system that spins off of the energy. It doesn't really matter what this thing is going to be called because the impacts up and down the East Coast are going to be rather dramatic. It's going to be a long-duration wind, rain, and surge event. We're going to have huge waves buffeting the coast for probably 3 or 4 days. Now here's a look at those ensemble forecasts. This is this morning, early, really the overnight. You can see how the GF ensembles have a bunch of them heading back to the west, a couple to the east. That's just not very plausible at this point. It just looks like this thing's going to get trapped or go north, but some piece of energy is going to break off and develop as a nor'easter. When we look at some of the sea surface temperatures, you can see there is a window for this system to keep its strength for a while because the Gulf Stream, 26 degrees Celsius water, extends all the way off the east coast of North Carolina. So as long as it stays like right in here or right in this western part of this area, it's still going to have enough ocean heat content to maintain tropical characteristics. But it's probably going to be going through quite a bit of shear with that trough coming in from the north and west, and that's really what's going to transition this into a monster of a nor'easter. This is the European model, which I'm starting to agree with more and more over time, because as it moves off the coast of North Carolina, you can see it produces hurricane force winds along the coast. Right in there, those reds are basically 70 to, in some cases, 80-mile-per-hour winds. But notice back to the west, we have some 30 and 40-mile-an-hour winds because remember, we got this big trough right here, and you've got this deep low pressure center. So the pressure gradient between the high, the surface high, which is going to be building in behind this front, and this trough is going to be really tremendous. Northeasterly winds are just going to be howling. But you can see these winds are going to be pushing water at the coast for a long period of time. And these are long duration winds offshore, able to build up huge swells of water. The European model is not as supported as much by the GFS, but the GFS is kind of interesting. Even though it seems to be out to lunch, it's starting to hint at a little piece of energy breaking off. You'll see at the end as it tries to pull Sandy off to the east, which is implausible, really. You see a little piece of energy try to break off right in here and move back towards the coast. And if you look over time, we'll take that off. You'll see what happens. A little low forms back to the west and actually becomes our nor'easter there. So it's trying to hint at something similar happening, but it just doesn't have all the paths correctly. Now, this is the wave forecast, and this is why I'm really concerned for the coast. These are the swell and wave height combined and the direction. And notice these swells. I mean, if you look carefully on the east side of this thing, those swells, here, this is 84 hours. If you look right there, this kind of lighter brown, you're getting into 30 and 35-foot swells offshore that eventually could rotate around and move all the way in to the Outer Banks. And then just look at the waves, though. Even though the system pulls away on the waves model, which is based, partly on the GFS, you can see the long duration of waves that are going to be buffeting the coast. So what I'm going to be watching here over the next couple days, obviously, are the tides along the coast. And the thing to remember, as we go into Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, Monday is a full moon. So we're talking about an astronomical high tide on top of that. So areas, especially east and northeast facing coastlines, which would include anything in North Carolina, the Outer Banks, up into the Virginias. I mean, I think the Outer Banks and areas of Pamlico Sound could really be hit hard by this high water mark, because if you throw in 10 to 20 or 30-foot swells and waves coming inland, you've got astronomical high tide. If we have a little bit of rain, which I fully expect inland, we could have all kinds of issues as this moves to the north. So we've got a couple days to watch this, but even though the track of the storm is likely never going to make direct impact on the United States, you still are going to see a huge impact here from the wind, swells, as well as the coastal flooding event. So anybody on the North Carolina coast, South Carolina coast, Florida coast, really the entire East Coast, but for my viewers in particular, the Carolinas, you need to pay particular attention to this. If you live in a coastal area, a tidal region, you need to start thinking about what would happen when the water starts to come up, because I do think we're going to see tremendous amounts of coastal flooding with this, even though the storm may never make landfall. It's one of the reasons we always say, the Hurricane Center always says, do not focus on the exact line track of this storm. You really need to focus more on the impacts. And the impacts, even on the west side of this storm, are going to be rather large. So I'll continue to post updates as we go into the weekend, but for all my friends on the coast, please be ready. Prepare now. It's always best to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. I'll have updates online on Facebook, Twitter, as well as my blog, and on WCNC.com, as well as on air at NBC Charlotte. Make sure you tune in. We'll keep you abreast of what's going to happen over the next couple of days as we head into the weekend as Sandy approaches the Carolina coast.